So I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Technology Happy Hour. My name is Sarah Salkup-Jones. I'm a program coordinator here with Virginia Clean Cities. And we have a little bit of a different situation today. Some of you may notice that the person that we had originally advertised being on the call, James, is not here with us today. He's a little bit sick. So we have Wido and Ann joining us with the Cummins team today. So thank you guys for stepping in last minute. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Ann, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Ann Oluyombo. I've been with Cummins for like 4 years now. I used to be in Nigeria before I moved over here to Canada, and I work with the New Power. So exciting to meet everybody.
Thanks, Ann, and thanks everyone for joining today, and Sarah for your kind introductions. I'm Wido Westbroek. My current role, I'm the Senior Director for Strategic Fuel Cell Projects for Cummins at large. Both Ann and I are based out of our Toronto headquarters for the hydrogen part of our business. And I'm going to take you through a bit of an introduction deck to everything that Cummins is doing in sort of the new power area, which includes batteries and fuel cells and other things along that line. So I'm really pleased to walk you through that. We pointed out that Kevin is our local source for connections, and at the very end of my presentation, there's a slide that gives you his coordinates, so you can reach out to him or myself or Ann as you see fit in the weeks and days ahead as you have more questions for us that we can't cover today. So with that, Ann's going to share her screen, and we're going to take you through our presentation. My background is a little bit different. I wasn't part of the Cummins family. I was part of a company called Hydrogenics, and Hydrogenics was a fuel cell and electrolyzer company. We started decades ago, and I've been with Hydrogenics for about 16 years, up until recently, meaning the late part of 2019, when we were acquired into the Cummins family. So we're going to take you on a little bit of a tour here. For those of you who know that Cummins, and then we'll just go to the next slide, Ann, thank you. Yeah, for those of you who know that Cummins, I mean, we're well established, of course, in the US. We have over 62,000 employees worldwide, and we're in over 190 countries. And we're kind of divided up into traditionally 4 big business units, and we have a new 5th young business unit that's joined us. So in these 4 business units, the engine side, the power systems group, our components division, and distribution. What I like to point out here is a little bit why a company like Hydrogenics was excited to join the Cummins family. First of all, as you all know, Cummins knows commercial vehicles, large-scale vehicles. And so when it comes to new power innovation, it was important for Hydrogenics and some other of the new power companies that have joined the Hydrogenics family to really be part and parcel of a company that for over 100 years has been working with fleet operators, end users in some of the largest commercial vehicles on the planet. And they're sort of always on requirement in all sorts of difficult environments meant that when you get to somebody who really understands commercial vehicles, Cummins would be one of the key players worldwide. And so they're a trusted partner of fleet operators, of vehicle manufacturers, and understand what it takes to make vehicles that can take you through tough environments and tough duty cycles. And so these 4 divisions really are founded around over 102 years of this effort. The distribution business was also very important because we have over 3,000, 4,000 groups around the world where the actual service and support of vehicles on the road takes place. There is a lot of excitement about new power, the transition into new energy sources, and getting into the delivery of vehicles and components that do this new function. But of course, at the end of the day, someone has to take care of it when it's on the road. And so having a Cummins that stands behind these products, that already has the manpower in place in Virginia and elsewhere, is critical so that the customer experience is really, there the way it needs to be. The New Power division is where Ann and myself have found a home. New Power business unit is the 5th and newest division, which was formed about 2.5 years ago. And all of the new power technologies which foster the drive to lower carbon emission vehicles in the commercial space is where you find us and all the folks that are working in that division. Next slide. This is a busy slide that I won't take you through on a line-by-line basis, but the main theme of this slide is to sort of reiterate that over these 102 years, Cummins has been on a path towards cleaner and cleaner fuel and cleaner and cleaner emission vehicles in the commercial space. A lot of folks wondered, well, how is it possible that a diesel company buys a fuel cell company or a hydrogen fuel production company? But folks that really look at it understand that they've been on this path for cleaner and lower and better emissions through their full 102 years. And that's where the transition has come from moving and providing diesel and diesel engine componentry to natural gas and natural gas engine componentry to battery electric, and then finally all the way to fuel cell, which we kind of like to say hydrogen is sort of the last stop of that journey where you can truly get to zero emission on both the fuel side as well as the emission side on the vehicles. So in this sort of chain of years, you can see that the real step towards battery began already before 2017. And the Cummins acquired a number of battery makers and folks that are specialists in electrifying vehicles, all the way through to the acquisition of Hydrogenics, which was our fuel cell company and electrolyzer company in September of 2019, when they ended up with a Wido in the mix. In this particular juncture, we've basically articulating a strategy for Cummins to be a sort of a portfolio of components that provide whatever customers need wherever they are in their journey to zero emission. So we can supply you batteries, battery electric powertrains, as well as fuel cell tanks or fuel tanks, hydrogen tanks for the vehicles themselves, including things like fueling stations. So we try to provide the full sort of ecosystem on folks' journey to zero emission wherever they are in that pathway. It also means that we're a bit agnostic, and I'll get into that a little bit more later on in terms of the battle between something like battery versus fuel cell, et cetera. We're able to service both sides of the equation, no matter where the customers are at and no matter the nature of the vehicle. Next slide. The core technologies behind this transition, battery electric components and powertrains. Powertrains is especially important because you'll find that there's a lot of companies today, vehicle manufacturers, that don't yet offer or make commercial vehicles for the general public. And it is a challenge sometimes to get these significantly large companies to go ahead and produce these vehicles because they don't see a big enough market to make the level of investment that's needed. So Cummins does step into the breach here, and on the powertrain side, we have a group in California where we will actually build the vehicles from ground up using products and well-known names from both the bus industry as well as the truck industry. And so we do get involved quite a bit in pilot projects, demonstrations where people want single unit volumes of vehicles for a government funded or pilot or for demonstrations, et cetera. And we build these out of our facility in California, whether it be sole battery or whether it be battery hydrogen. Fuel cells and fuel cell powertrains, we've done quite a few vehicles with fuel cells over the year, and I'll show you more of that in the coming slides. A big piece of fuel cells is from where does the fuel come from? And in the early days of Hydrogenics, we differentiated ourselves from other well-known fuel cell makers like the Ballards of the world by being a one-stop shop where we also provide the actual production systems which make the fuel. Using fresh water and electricity, we split the fuel into hydrogen and oxygen, and then the hydrogen gets captured into storage tanks and goes through dispenser systems to a fueling station. And we've done quite a few fueling stations over our history, so we can support in that area as well. And then finally, there's another type of fuel cell, which is starting to come of age, if you will, a solid oxide fuel cell. And this is a fuel cell which has an interesting characteristics to it in that it's very suitable for primary baseload power, so stationary power. So when you take a look and you think about, well, diesel generators that are running sort of constantly, solid oxide fuel cells will do that. And again, be zero emission fuel. The nice thing about solid oxide fuel cells is that they don't just require hydrogen fuel. They can also operate on other fuels, such as methane, such as methanol, such as natural gas, for instance. So they can also be part of the transition but not having to use pure hydrogen as do our fuel cells for vehicles. Next slide. This is a little bit about what I mentioned earlier about this battle between battery and fuel cell, and how in Cummins there's not a battle, it's an agnostic, it's a partnership, if you will. And primarily the way we look at it is that in every fuel cell vehicle today, even in the passenger cars, you will have batteries. Batteries are a tool that's required in the hybridization of what a zero emission vehicle will need, even if it is running majority of the time on fuel from hydrogen and fuel cells providing the electricity. And so in this schematic here, I'm showing a full electric vehicle on the right, which is showing you with essentially batteries and a traction drive directing the energy to the motors that drive the wheels. And on the left-hand side, you can just see that we have fewer batteries because we've inserted the prime mover being a fuel cell and capturing the energy of the fuel in a tank, and away you go. And so this is really a complementary, if you will, side. And what happens in our business is when companies come to us and they have a certain vehicle in mind, we take a look at all the requirements of that vehicle, the performance requirements, the range, the power, everything that it's going to go through in its daily duty cycle. And from that, we can provide the best mix of technologies which will drive the lowest TCO while maintaining that performance. And so that's where these technologies are quite complementary. And that's why Cummins is really quite a helpful partner for a lot of folks in this space, because we can make these recommendations, because we certainly know the duty cycle of most commercial vehicles. Next slide. A lot of folks talk about, well, when will this really happen in the commercial vehicle space? There's, of course, a lot of press and information out there about passenger vehicles and what folks are doing in pure electric passenger vehicles and some fuel cell electric vehicles that are out there today from various manufacturers globally. But all of it comes down to a line of, but when will it really happen in the US market or in Virginia, or when will it happen in Europe, and et cetera. And from our experience as Hydrogenics and within the Cummins family, there are really four big pieces that kind of overlay whenever new technologies come into play. And it really is the case for all types of industry and all types of technologies that these three or four things have to sort of intersect before you really start to see true movement. There will be early movers, there will be pilot projects and technology testing, et cetera, that goes on. But before the industry really starts to move, you need quite the intersection of these things. Technical readiness, that's absolutely critical. And a lot of those pilots and demo vehicles that are out there on the road today, whether it be fuel cell or battery in the commercial space, are about demonstrating technical readiness. Infrastructure readiness, whether it's charging stations for the batteries or whether it's refueling capability on hydrogen fuel, there has to be enough reference sites and showcases of infrastructure readiness to demonstrate that it's safe, it operates well, and it meets all the regular everyday requirements. Regulatory requirements, regulations that can either hinder the adoption or can accelerate the adoption, need to be in place. And these vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on both state level, federal level, and in different countries. And a very important part is TCO, of course. At the end of the day, for those that are going to adopt this, whether it's fleet operators, whether it's transit authorities, they have to know what is the total cost of operating this bus or this truck using this new power solution. I want to understand the fuel costs. I want to understand the maintenance costs. All of that has to be sort of shown. It has to show how it's going to mature and change over time so that these folks can make informed decisions about when they need to start really seriously looking at adopting this. The technical readiness and the infrastructure readiness play an important part in the TCO as well. It allows us to demonstrate from real world applications, real world running, what the actual costs are that these different places, these different vehicles are experiencing in real time. And then again, that's where Cummins again can play a role, where we can inform individuals who are not yet ready to actually say, I want to have the keys to a vehicle, please, but want to understand from modeling, from TCO, from our experience in what we've done in our past, to show, well, where is it today and how is it looking? And where do you see it really coming into play on whether it's a transit bus side or whether it's on a delivery van side or a number of other applications in the commercial space. So this is really critical. What's exciting is that, I mean, I've been in the business of the hydrogen fuel cell and hydrogen production side since 2000, when I sort of joined into the hydrogen family. In all this time, there's been so much about, well, when is it coming? And it's always been every 3 years, every 4 years, maybe in 5 years' time, there was always this discussion going on in the hydrogen business and in the battery business. But in all my days in it, I've never seen such an appetite for this being driven out of the US market. And I think a lot of that's to do with a lot of the regulatory environment that's going on in currently, and a lot of the sort of appetite to understand where this is really starting to happen. And I'm going to show you some images of vehicles that we've done, and I'm going to point to a few which are in full commercial operation in different countries, yes, but that are already demonstrating a TCO which is compelling enough that folks are saying, let's go now. Next slide. This gives you a sense of sort of all the different aspects of where battery and hydrogen can make a play. So it's a sort of a simple graphic that tries to capture in one shot the various applications, drayage trucks, transit buses, rail, terminal tractors. These kinds of vehicles are all in play when it comes to battery electric and battery fuel cell. One thing I'll just mention about how do we define where it makes sense to use one or the other or a combination. In the case of battery, when it comes to these larger vehicles, based on range requirements and charging times of not only current battery technology, but where Cummins sees battery technology evolving over the next years, you're sort of typically looking at vehicles that return to base at the end of the day, and during that day, they've traveled maybe no more than about 100 miles. That is sort of typically where battery plays a role. The other thing we have to consider is, because of battery weight, how much of the payload of the vehicle is taken up by the extra battery weight. And so that's where that also comes into play when we make a decision on, can you do pure battery, or do you need a combination of battery fuel cell? Next slide. Here are some examples on the battery electric side that Cummins has directly done. And many of these vehicles we've built, as I mentioned, out of our California facility. So in the field today, Bluebird, if you Google Bluebird and Bluebird school buses, and Kevin can certainly tell you more details about the number of buses on the road, but that is certainly an application which is kind of prime time, if you will. You also see Gillig, a North American bus manufacturer that is doing battery electric transit buses in the US market. And we've done a number of terminal tractors for various clients. Demonstrators where this is more of a proof of concept or a pilot project. We have in fact done heavy duty trucks. So these would be drayage trucks that are working at a port. We've done step-in vans for Purelator, for FedEx, and a few others. Hybrid utility trucks, so more smaller trucks and down from the Class 8 to the Class 6 vehicles. And we've even done an excavator for a company that was interested in seeing, what kind of energy and what kind of requirements do we have if we electrify an excavator and go pure battery. In the next slide, we're speaking purely about hydrogen fuel cell. And so when you get to hydrogen fuel cell, duty cycle and range is much, much larger. In terms of what's in the field and in play, transit buses, you're seeing more and more transit buses, primarily in Europe, where you've got essentially hundreds of fuel cell transit buses in operation daily. Cummins is associated and well known for this little blue train that you see here. These are commercial passenger trains that we provide. So we build the engines, the fuel cell engines in our facility in Canada, and we have a brand new facility that's opening up in Germany, which we're going to have operating in March of this year, where they'll start to take on and produce the engines for the local market in Europe. But those trains are running in Europe, and you'll see lots of announcements about these trains. A single train carrying 300 passengers has over 1,000 kilometers of range on one fueling. And for the operator, it's no different than his diesel experience, in that the train is there in the morning, it fuels up within 20 minutes, and then it does its full run, connecting various cities with zero emission transit. And the TCO, what I mentioned before about some plays that are already in place, the TCO of this rail is already equivalent to the TCO of diesel or diesel electric, given the fact, of course, that diesel is more expensive in Europe. So it has an immediate match, if you will, on TCO, but there's a bigger benefit here. The electrification between cities in Europe would require further broadening of the overhead wire systems, what they call the catenary electric systems, if you were going to electrify a rail to connect between the larger cities. And that is about a cost of 2 million euros per kilometer in Europe to do, based on all the infrastructure you have to do. The rail itself already exists. That's just the cost of bringing all the overhead electrics. So here you have a solution which already is TCO equivalent, but requires no extra expenditure on infrastructure. You simply have to have a hydrogen fueling station at the transit authority, and then you provide it with hydrogen fuel, and away you go. So that's the compelling piece there that we've got. And so these are very large vehicles carrying many people at high velocity. And so it's a real sort of tribute to what you can do with this kind of device. And it allows us to try to bring that into North America. And the company that builds these, our partner there is Alstom, and they are now bringing this technology into North America as well. So you may see these rail cars running on the roads, on the rail here. Municipal vehicles, we do a lot of garbage trucks, refuse trucks for municipalities in Europe, using our fuel cell and our fueling tanks. And then on the right-hand side there, commercial vehicles, again, drayage trucks and line haul trucks. This is an image of a truck that's running in LA. And we're doing a number of those this year, about 11 in total, I believe, out of our California facility. That'll be hitting the roads this year and next year on various pilots and demonstration processes. Next slide. The fuel for all of the hydrogen piece comes from electrolyzers. What's interesting about electrolyzers is it's a very old technology. It's been around for a very long time. Hydrogenics actually came out of a company from 1948 that has been doing electrolyzers in Europe and around the globe. And so here are images of over, we've got about 500 to 600 electrolyzer systems that are in operation today in over 100 countries. And this is 24/7 production of hydrogen. So from a technology readiness perspective, it ticks all the boxes, of course. If you take one of these units and you put it inside a building or next to a building where you've got trucks coming into fuel, you can make the hydrogen at night and dispense the hydrogen during the day to the vehicles that show up, whether it be a train, whether it be a truck, whether it be a bus. And so this is sort of the background of the technology. This is very small to very large scale. We've got a system that we put into Canada about 2 years ago that's been operating on a 24/7 basis, and it's already produced in the last year and a half over 1.5 million tons of hydrogen. And if you think of, how much fuel is that, how many vehicles is that? A typical transit bus uses about 30 to 35 kilograms or 70, 75 pounds of fuel for one full day of running. And so that's a lot of fuel for a lot of buses. And interestingly enough, that particular one that's up in Canada that's running today, it is taking its electricity from a hydroelectric source. So there's no carbon in that source. So the fuel that's being produced is what people call green hydrogen, because of course there's no carbon in the production of the fuel. There's no carbon that we introduce into the electrolyzing of the fuel. And so at the end of the day, it's carbon-free fuel. And if it goes into a zero emission vehicle running on fuel cell, there's no carbon in the emissions of what goes on in the vehicle. So it's true zero emission transit. Next slide. Here's an image to the right of that fueling system that I spoke about. That's up in Canada, producing 8,000 kilograms of hydrogen per day. And that particular site is a company called Air Liquide, which is known as one of the big 2 or 3 companies in North America that produce various chemical gases for all sorts of industry, including hydrogen. And they essentially made the decision to go with electrolysis because it was cheaper than their conventional methods here. And so we produced those 4 units, which work together and produce the amount of hydrogen they require. They liquefy the hydrogen, load it into tanker trucks, and those tanker trucks serve the East Coast of the US for a variety of the markets, including fueling stations for zero emission vehicles. And on the left-hand side is a fueling station. You can just make out under the canopy, one of the pumps is white. It doesn't have its decals on yet. We took that shot just to show that that's the pump that we put in there, which is a hydrogen dispenser. This dispenses hydrogen fuel to a zero-emission passenger vehicle station, which is doing taxis in the city of Quebec in Canada. In the black building that you can just see off to the back, inside that building, we have electrolyzers sitting there, which are taking electricity at night to turn it into the fuel, which is dispensed during the day to roughly 100 of these vehicles that are operating in around the city of Quebec. We've done about 60 hydrogen fueling stations globally. In the US market, we're known for doing some of the fueling stations in California. In this particular instance, we've done a full station here, added on to a full station that already existed, and we've added all the technology that's required. But from a Cummins perspective, we can supply our electrolyzers and stop right there, or we can do more than that and supply more of the bits and pieces that are required to fully outfit a station with hydrogen production capability. And so we're very open to whatever customers and clients need in terms of what makes sense for them. Next slide. This is just sort of a final summary, if you will. As I mentioned from the beginning, over 102 years of Cummins' existence, there's been a journey underway within Cummins. There's been the journey that started with Clessie Cummins in the early days in the US, where he brought the diesel technology engine into play and took it across the US as a technology readiness demonstration of what a diesel engine could do for people. And then you fast forward over these 100 years, and emission standards have gotten more and more stringent. And so Cummins has worked diligently and hard on producing cleaner and cleaner diesel engines that produce lower and lower emissions at the tailpipe. That has moved then into natural gas. And we've done an awful lot. I think we're the largest provider of natural gas engines for vehicles in North America. And then it's gone into sort of a hybrid situation where we've brought in our battery electric and our fuel cell pieces since early 2017. So essentially the message here is that, we have a lot of background in what it really takes for commercial vehicles to operate on the roads for our customers. We have an awful lot of background in this transition and what's really required for technical readiness, for infrastructure readiness, and what it means at the end of the day for the TCO to the end users. And we're very, very open to share this experience, this knowledge with a variety of stakeholders and clients to help them accelerate their transition as they move towards what we hope to see one day as a zero emission transport system. That's essentially my speak. I think I'm within the time limit, so Sarah won't yell. And so I'm opening it up to questions, and we can toggle back and forth into the deck if need be. Sarah?
Awesome. Yes, and don't worry, I'm not much of a yeller anyways. So if anyone would like to just go ahead and feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions that you have. If you don't want to unmute yourselves or your mic isn't working or something like that, you can also put them into the chat and we will answer any questions that way. But let's just open it up for a question free for all.
Hi, I have a quick question. This is Rodney from Roush Industries.
Hi, Rodney.
Hi, thank you. That was a great presentation. And I think if I understand you correctly, a lot of the applications, I guess, that Cummins New Power is kind of seeing and working toward is more commercial type applications. Just curious to hear your thoughts on how far away, I know, how far away do you think those 3 or 4 things that you kind of brought up need to align before we start seeing that play out in the passenger vehicle space? I'm asking the question too, because within Roush, we kind of see a lot of different companies coming with these ideas in their startup, and they're kind of pre-funding and stuff. And so I've seen a few, even in Virginia, that are kind of dabbling in the plug-in fuel cell passenger vehicle market, but they're a long, long way away. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are around that, as far as mainly with regard to the timing aspect and everything kind of aligning.
Yeah, it's a great question, Rodney. Thank you for that. I mean, in the early days of the company that I came from, there was a lot of questions about, hey guys, are we doing fuel cells for passenger cars? Because our focus in the early stages was with the duty cycle of passenger cars, will it make sense at the end of the day to have fuel cells there? but there were a lot of folks, so we said we didn't think so. And so we focused our technology roadmap, if you will, for fuel cells on the larger vehicles, which is why we're doing trains today versus passenger cars today. But everybody, most people around us, including the car companies, were really strong on going hard into passengers. I mean, General Motors was one of the first big movers more than 25 years ago to try and do hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Today, it's still a little bit vague as to where it will turn out, but it's all to do with cost. It's no longer to do so much with technology readiness of a fuel cell or technology readiness of a battery. Both are demonstrated over millions of miles traveled, are perfectly suited for passenger vehicles. And so today, if you buy a Toyota Mirai, which is a fuel cell vehicle, it will deliver exactly what you expect it to deliver from your experience with a passenger car. In the case of a Tesla, we hear also, and many people report on generally very good things there. The only difference between the two at the moment is that there's a difference in sort of customer behavior that's required, meaning that will take longer to refuel a battery vehicle versus a fuel cell vehicle. But the opposite, the corollary of it is, where are you going to fuel your fuel cell vehicle? If you're in California, you have currently about 67 fueling stations strategically located where you can go, spend 2 or 3 minutes at the pump and fuel your vehicle, and away you go, just like you're used to with your regular gasoline powered vehicle. But with batteries, you've got to charge it. You've got to either charge it during your trip or you charge it at night when you're home. And for most people who are driving vehicles, that works perfectly fine. So from the customer experience point of view, it's kind of a bit of both as to where it goes. So I think what's going to happen now is, where is the cost going to go? And in the case of hydrogen fuel cell, a big piece of the cost is the cost of the hydrogen. Where is that fuel going to go? There is cost to the electricity that you are pulling from your home to go into your vehicle, and it's a bit of a hidden cost for many, so that's not really something that's taken a look at through the passenger vehicle side. I mean, that's sort of where it is. We, of course, believe that the cost of the fuel of hydrogen is really coming down. I mean, in the last sort of 10 years, in the fuel cell side of things, there's been an 85% reduction in costs in the fuel cells that people are making for passenger cars or are making for commercial vehicles, as we do. The cost of the fuel, however, is still sort of a little bit stuck with, where is the fuel being produced? Is it coming from traditional sources, which is steam methane reforming of natural gas, which is 90% of hydrogen is produced that way? Or is it coming from electrolysis, which is more expensive? So if I'm looking at it at the pump today in California, because of the price of electricity, you're looking at something like $10 to $15 US for a kilogram of fuel for a passenger car. And you need about 5 kilograms for that passenger car to drive about 100 kilometers. Sorry, 500 kilometers. It's 100 kilometers per kilogram. So to get, you're trying to kind of sense that out in terms of, where is that going down the road? I would say that it's right now a mixture. I don't think one bullet fixes all things. And I don't think this is, VHS versus beta. I might be dating myself there, but I don't think it's one of those moments. You're going to have certain areas where battery vehicles are perfectly suited. And you're going to have certain areas where you need fuel cell, even with passenger, where you're getting into a large vehicle or an SUV and you want to drive, 1,000 kilometers. I hope that helps.
Yep, perfect. Thank you very much for that detailed answer. I appreciate it.
This is Rob Erda. I have a quick question. If able, sort of pulling on the string on the production of the hydrogen molecule, it seems like, as you said, the cost needs to come down. Does that come from, and I guess the question is, who's going to drive that? If you think solar is maybe too expensive to drive an electrolyzer, does it go to nuclear, and is that driven by utility or government or both? And I mean, we've been involved in some demonstration projects on blending hydrogen into the natural gas on large frame turbines.
Yeah.
And the question is always, where's the hydrogen coming from? Is it truly green or pink, as people say, or is it, from nuclear? Or is it just, is the carbon hydrogen? And I guess I'd be curious, how do we drive that price down, and what do you think is going to move the needle?
Yeah, so the price of gray hydrogen, which is the most prevalent hydrogen, which comes from steam methane reforming of natural gas, that's established. You're using very large refinery size capital investments, and you're taking natural gas as a feedstock. And so the price of that is known and steady state. And that's sort of, if you can get there with green hydrogen and have the same price tag, but maybe not with all that capital infrastructure, that's a huge win. And that's where we're driving it as Cummins. And that's where we want to see it. I mean, essentially, I would like it to be on parity with diesel fuel. That's where we want to get to. If you can get everything you get from a diesel vehicle, range, performance, the heavy duty performance that comes with that, and zero emission in the fuel and zero emission in how the vehicle performs, that's what society needs, we believe at Cummins. That's where we're going. That's sort of that last stage. And is that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now? It's up to us to work that as fast as possible so that we can be of service as quickly as possible. The cost of the different processes for getting that hydrogen has come down tremendously. It has a lot to do with efficiency, but you made an interesting point there when you mentioned nuclear or when you mentioned solar. There is a lot of wasted electricity readily available, which is not being used, but is lost. At 2 a.m. in the US, every wind farm, which could turn, is not really turning because it doesn't really need to generate the electricity that the asset is sitting there.
Yeah.
And you could take that electricity that's being made at 2 a.m. and send it directly into electrolyzers, which will take fresh water, turn it into hydrogen and medical grade oxygen. And that hydrogen goes into a storage and can be used anywhere you like. In Toronto, Canada, where we have nuclear industry, we have the Niagara Falls, we have a big problem of surplus electricity. In Ontario, Canada, we are actually funding and paying New York State to take our surplus electricity because it's cheaper for us to pay New York to take our surplus electricity rather than spend the money to turn down our nuclear stations. This is a known fact that's been going on for decades. Now I have an ability to show the province of Ontario, I can give you something which is going to absorb that surplus energy and turn it into hydrogen, which you can use as fuel for rail, for trucks, for transit authorities. I just have to put in this thing called an electrolyzer, which is like a big energy shock absorber. And if those vehicles aren't there yet, that's okay, because I can take the production of the hydrogen from the surplus electricity, which is there anyway, and I can now take that hydrogen that's produced and I can direct it into the natural gas pipelines that run under all of our cities here in Ontario. And with an up to sort of 4% by volume mix of hydrogen with the existing natural gas, it has no negative effect on any of the appliances or furnaces in people's homes and businesses that burn that natural gas, which now has a little bit more of a clean, green thing to it. And so that's, there's a lot of interest about where is there surplus surplus electricity, and can I in fact leverage that to make it even easier to bring in a green hydrogen source.
Thank
I'll
you.
flag that there was also a question in the chat related to energy and grid systems. Could you discuss microgrid support applications for hydrogen?
Sure. I mentioned wind farms, and there's a number of communities where wind is a prevalent source, but of course it's oscillating and it's not a continuous source. And so bringing in an electrolyzer to take that electricity and fresh water, store it in the form of hydrogen, and then feed microgrid auxiliary power units, which are racks of fuel cells. When you look at what does it look like, it looks a little bit like a data center. We take several fuel cells, we put them into a rack, which then goes into an ISO container and then sits out on the community and acts as a backup power or auxiliary power. It can come on when you need it, when the wind dies. You can use it for peak shaving if there's extra costs. So when everyone turns on their power and starts to draw on it at 4 in the afternoon. So there's lots of different applications there that hydrogen is being looked at, and we're working with a number of folks in both that side of it within our power systems business unit, folks that have traditionally used diesel generators and diesel gensets, and show them a pathway to using fuel cell. Yeah, great question on the chat. I see from Amy Eckberg there. I spent my first 8 years at Hydrogenics as the managing director of our electrolyzer division in Belgium. And I got a sort of a firsthand look at how is Europe moving forward with this, what's working, what's not working in terms of adopting these technologies. There is already a cultural difference there, which makes it easier and a bit faster when these technologies are new and when you're trying to adopt it. And that is the public-private partnerships that you see as a natural part of business there. And so early on in Europe's adoption, there were studies about, where is the future going to be? Is it going to be batteries? Is it going to be fuel cells? Is it going to be a combination of the two? How do we, from an energy security perspective, how do we, from a environmental sustainability perspective, how do we adopt the right technology, and how do we foster that? And so there are these public-private partnerships that are set up where industry has a say, and not one player, but all players of an industry are involved. All have a say. They try to, I don't know how you say it right, spread the peanut butter correctly and fairly. And it fosters that initial pilot, that technical readiness, that infrastructure readiness, those validations of what the TCO is. And at the same time, by getting industry to say, okay, great, you're going to help source and provide some funding on this, to provide some support on this. We can get the station built. We can get a number of buses supplied. We get them into operation and passenger service within the transit authorities. That happens very quickly there, comparatively speaking, to elsewhere. At the same point, industry then learns from that, and that builds up our next iteration of improving the product. And lastly, it provides real pull. There are number of global OEMs that build the vehicles that are still needing to get a little bit pulled in when serious players start saying, look, my next 200 buses or my next 200 vehicles are going to need to be in this direction. So you need to now make that investment. You can't wait any longer, which is a tough balance to strike. In the US, there are things there that can be studied and adopted, but then there's also the business culture and the government culture in both Canada and the US and North America, which makes it sometimes a bit more challenging. That said, in the last sort of 18 months, 20 months, a number of departments, and I noticed folks at Argonne are on the line, as well as NREL, they have played really important parts to explain to regulatory and government agencies about, again, technical readiness, safety, a lot of things that are, these are third party, these are not industry. They really study. We've supplied technology to NREL and Argonne actually over the years, so that they can evaluate and sort of pick apart where is it safe, where does it need to be improved. And so with those voices at the table, governments can also start to look at creating not just policy and regulatory, but they can start to actually put out roadmaps. And that's what you've seen recently in the last sort of 18 months. Canada's been a bit slower than the US in this regard, but they have just released it here in Canada in 2021. But you start to see roadmaps where industry and various agencies have sort of voiced, here is a smart way to do this in a way that spreads the risk, spreads the cost, spreads the investment, such that it benefits the different societies. So I think some lessons are already being taken. Thank you for that question. I think at this moment in time, there's nothing I'd recommend to change to accelerate further. I think there's large bills in the U.S. being announced to support hydrogen and electric and zero emission transport, and I think we need to pick up on those signals and really try to accelerate this forward.
Excellent. Do we have any additional questions? I'm not seeing any flowing into the chat at this point. I'll just let us pause for a second in case anyone is flipping over to unmute themselves.
I had
Well,
another,
oh,
I
go
have
ahead.
one more question. And that was a great response. Thank you, by the way, to my last question. How do you insulate yourself from supply chain disruptions, especially with new technologies where supply chains are not developed or, entrenched or built up like traditional supply chains?
Fantastic question. That is in our annual strategy session on a repeated basis, going back already 15 years. For new technologies, this is the case. And in the case of fuel cell primarily, you see it where there's currently few external sources of providing the core materials needed within the fuel cell stack to perform all the functions it needs to perform. And you'll see that a lot of companies then have to make decisions. Do I use the small supply chain that's out there? How do I incentivize that supply chain to grow, to get into size? And as Hydrogenics, it was challenging for us to get that kind of leverage with that supply chain. It was also challenging for us to bring in the investment needed to internalize some of this and do sort of a make-buy. And at the same time, we're working with outside sources. We're also building up our internal supply base. And we did some of that. Within the Cummins organization, of course, we're kind of hitting it out of the park in this aspect, because this is what Cummins does for its bread and butter every day. Whether it's new technology, whether it's old technology. I mean, if you look at the global supply chain with established technologies, the fragility of that is there, even with traditional tech. And so the expertise within the Cummins family and a lot of the large blue chip companies in the world are working that hard these days with everything that's going on worldwide. Is also turned to what we're doing in our internal tech. Smaller companies will leverage consortiums. That is something that's a benefit in Europe, where it's quite normal for academic labs or government labs to be sort of fostering a consortium of companies that dial into it to create some of those components and supply chain requirements to try to expand the supply base. In North America, there's joint ventures and partnerships that we would do with critical companies that would build some of these components for us. So we leverage all of that.
Great, thank you.
Great questions, Amy, and thank you, Wido, for all of the excellent answers you provided. I am going to go ahead and pop some additional information in the chat for everyone. As you can see, they are now sharing Kevin's contact information. If you have any questions and you are located in Virginia, he would be your point of contact. I'm also going to put my contact information in the chat. If you have any questions about the technology you learned about today, or if you are interested in learning more about what we do at Virginia Clean Cities, I'll also be popping Kevin's information in the chat as well, so it's easy for you to copy and paste that over right now. I'd also like to invite everyone to our next technology happy hour, which will be taking place on March 17th. We are working on nailing down the speaker right now. Spring is a very busy time, especially with Earth Day coming up in April and Earth Month, as we like to celebrate it here in Virginia. But I'm going to pop that registration information in the chat now if anyone is interested in pre-registering. So thank you so much to all of our great attendees with all your great questions, and to Wido and Kevin and Anne with the Cummins team. Thank you all for being so flexible and for being such great speakers today. We really appreciate it. It was great to learn about all of the exciting technology you guys have.
Thanks, Sarah. Our pleasure.